Yeah, great. Look, welcome back to this week's edition of the podcast. It's great to have guests on the podcast that have been there and done that in business. And I've been really lucky to get a guy on this evening who's been there and done it in a lot of cases in business, has written the book, and he has read a book, which we'll talk about during the podcast, and that's Chris Spratling. So welcome to the podcast, Chris. How you doing?
I'm great, James. Thanks for having me on this evening. It's really great to be here.
Oh, no worries at all. Look, I know you've recently, as I say, I went to the book launch a couple of weeks ago, and you were launching the next day, and that Amazon bestseller happened. So you must be really thrilled that happened, that took place.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the response has been incredible, and it's way exceeded our expectations. So it's great to see that a few experiences over the last 20, 30 years have resonated with a few people.
Yeah, well, they definitely resonated, and there's lots of stuff we can unpick in terms of the book over the course of the next 45 minutes or so. But before we get to that point, just to give everyone a bit of background, obviously you've been running Chalk Hill Blue for a number of years now, but before that you were involved in a number of different businesses in publishing and in a number of areas. But give everyone that doesn't know you a quick synopsis of Chris Spratling, apart from when they're going to read the book. Give them a quick synopsis of Chris Spratling and what you've and your experience.
That's the hardest question you're probably going to chuck at me tonight, talking about myself. As you say, started an early career in publishing, but I think very quickly established an enthusiasm and also a degree of skill in helping transform slightly underperforming, or if not slightly failing businesses, which resulted in spending some time working in private equity run businesses. Not very glamorous, but probably the best known of those was Readiness, which we took from a failing business in the UK to a significantly profitable one, which then I subsequently bought with some private equity support. And that was really then the start of my own entrepreneurial journey, where myself and my wife, as it now is, we bought and sold multiple businesses over the years, and today run 3 or 4 seven-figure businesses that keep us entertained and somewhat busy. But we do it because we love it.
Yeah, and I've been lucky enough to attend the workshops you guys run with businesses, and having 90 hundreds of people in a room where you talk about growth and building plans, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But obviously, this is a sales related podcast as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about initially before we get onto the book, and we are going to talk about the book because I think it's such an important point, especially for people listening to this that run businesses that go, well, actually, I want my business to become something. I want it to be something of value. They want the ideal for it to have something that they can the dream is obviously then being able to sell and have this lifestyle and whatever else from there. But I want to talk about sales because obviously, one of the things we've connected with is around the sort of the ethos of sales. And I guess I talk to people about sales being one of the most important things in business. And I know it's an thing that you echo as well in the work you do, isn't it? That without sales, you haven't got a business, right?
Correct. I mean, look, we have the best idea in the world, but if you can't monetize it, there is no point. There's no way to feed yourself at the end of the month. So, it's really important that you can create a scalable business, a sustainable business that can provide a product or a service that customers want. I think we share a similar philosophy that actually selling is not about pushing your product or service onto people. It's helping them to buy that product or service. And there's a great overlap, of course, with ultimately, as the phrase goes, selling your business. It's about creating a business that people ultimately want to buy.
Yeah.
And, it's about that shift, I suppose, from creating a focus that's all about income to one of more value creation. But that relates to a business at various different stages of its growth cycles, not just the exit, of course. And I think that's where we share a common belief about. So
yeah, it is. And look, just go back. Obviously, you run businesses and run your own businesses very successfully for a number of years. I mean, what are the things that you think? Because we also know as well, so many business owners get it wrong when it comes to selling. But before we get to that point, what was your earliest experience of sales in terms of what when you were running? Can you remember when? Obviously you've run lots of businesses, your first sort of sales experience, or can you remember and who taught you to sell? That would be my question as well. So
I had the most amazing sales training. I even today, I always refer back to being one of the luckiest guys ever, in that my first ever job as a graduate, I went to work in publishing. I went to work for Michael Heseltine publishing company Haymarket. I worked out of their Teddington offices, selling some of their specialist magazines. And I lucked out. I got the most glamorous magazine in the world to sell on, Practical Caravan.
Love it. So you're going to tell me,
Seriously,
caravan.
if you can sell to caravan dealers and caravan park owners, you can sell to anyone. They are one step removed from second-hand car salesmen on the whole, in my experience, and they're really tough nuts to crack. So you've got to understand how to create something they really want to buy. So Haymarket in those days, and I think even today, had an amazing reputation for being a brilliant sales training academy, and they really taught us how to sell. These were the days where there were Rolodexes, no computers, triple carbon sheeted order forms and things like that. But boy, you learned to sell, and it was it wasn't a call center type operation, but it was precious, and you sunk or you swung. I loved it. I really did. But you really understand how to position what it is you're selling, even if it's not something glamorous like pages in a caravan magazine, to buyers in a way that they can really resonate with and see value.
But I guess even back to then, but you're selling practical caravanning. I guess the caravan dealer at the time, whoever they were, wanted to sell more of their caravans, right? They wanted to be more visible. So you're solving a problem or desire for them, which is actually they want to sell more of their stuff. They want more people to think, oh, I can't get the right type of caravan, and come to them. So I guess it's the same principles of selling that apply all the time, right? It's getting them to want that or to solve a problem.
Absolutely, it really is. It's matching solutions to needs.
Yeah. And do you remember at the time, obviously you were, Haymarket, and obviously had the approach of selling them was very, was structured, and they obviously were experts at doing it. Did you have one or two individual people that you sort of looked up to at that time, or that mentored you, or you can remember things that they sort of great things that they taught you, or can you remember anyone in particular that sort of like, some stuff that you made me think, yeah, they taught me some good lessons, even if they were hard ones?
Look, it was quite laddish. In fact, the worst behaved were the ladies in the team. They were more laddish than the rest of us guys on occasion. I had a great sales director when I first started, a guy called Gary Kimberley, who was a real stalwart of the Haymarket environment, was there for 25 years. He was a tough nut, and he used to enjoy making sure that you knew he was in charge and what have you. But there were a few of us that equally liked to play the game and see if we could put one over on him at times as well. So, orders definitely got top drawed, on occasions, because he used to wait later and later into the month to set the sales targets.
Okay.
How you were doing. So sales orders disappeared all of a sudden, and then suddenly they came out once they set the target. So, we all played the game. But, I think you've got to love what you do, and he definitely encouraged us to be really competent at what we did, but learn to really love it, and we had a lot of fun as well as working really hard.
Do you know what? It's really interesting you mentioned that, because I've spoken to lots of business owners. I know you speak to lots of them in your programs. A lot of business owners don't enjoy selling, though, do they?
I think in this country in particular, we have a very stereotypical view of sales, a very outdated view of sales, in my view. There are still people, certainly of my generation, that think it's very much about double glazing salesman type approaches and what have you. Whereas if you reposition it, as we said earlier, and I think again you share this belief that it's really about helping people to buy, then actually it's not got those negative connotations that certainly people of my generation grew up with. So I think sales is the most special thing in the world. If you can help people to buy something they really need, that provides a solution. So, I think that's right. But I think people are scared of it. And I think, part of what you do clearly very well, and we've seen you do it at some of our workshops that you've come and presented at, is demystifying the complexities of it, demystifying the grubbiness that sometimes people associate with sales, and helping people to see that actually it's just about having conversations with people and having some fun at the same time.
Yeah, it is. And you're right. And actually, like you say, it's being human in those interactions. And
Yeah.
but obviously you again, talk to what are some of the common mistakes that you see from people then you're talking to businesses? I mean, one of the common ones that I talk about a lot is that people aren't consistent enough. I talk to people about selling being. I was
Yeah.
talking to a client yesterday. I said to sales is like the gym, right? If you go to the gym, you get fit, and then if you stop going to the gym, you don't. You lose your fitness, right? It's one of those things you've got to be consistent with, and people don't. The people want to dip in and out of it for me, which is something I talk to them. You've got to be consistent, but are there any other common, from your experience, mistakes or things that you see business owners or sales people get wrong or do that that frustrate you?
All right, look, I think you already hit the number one thing already about consistency. Talking about whether it's sales, whether it's marketing, whether it's your operations, whether it's customer service. The thing that separates good business from the really great businesses is consistency across all of those areas and more within any business. But if we come back to sales in particular, yes, you need to be consistent with it, but for me, it's all about the quality of the questions that you ask. And again, this is one of the things that I've learned over many, many years, that sales isn't that pushy salesman that we just talked about. It's actually just about the quality of the questions. And actually, I smiled a few days ago. I think I was looking at one of your LinkedIn posts, and it was about the art of silence as a conversion tool. Absolutely, one of the first things we were ever taught was to ask the right question. And then, frankly, as my sales director at the time, Gary, used to say, please just shut up then. Ask the question, but shut up.
Yeah.
Just let them talk.
And it's such a true point, and such a people talk about, oh, you sales, or you got the gift of the gab, and I'm like, the greatest salespeople I've ever known, a great question, they'll ask great questions, and they'll I did a post a couple of months back on how introverts are really good at selling. And I said the reason they're good at selling is because if they are able to ask the right question at the right time in the right way, sales is, people think sales are just, no one wants to hear a salesperson drabble on for hours and hours. They want to ask a question, dig deeper, find out what's happening, and then see if there's a fit or not. And if there's not, great, then move on. If there is, then let's see if we can build a solution for it. So there's this perception that you've got to be this gift of the gab or can sell, ice to the Eskimos, and actually it's not the case, is it?
Well, Andrew, this is not a joke. This is genuinely true. We used to have a competition, about who could have the longest silence on a sales call.
Yeah.
Perfect.
There you go, and it works well. So look, before we come on and talk about the book, because I know it's been something that we want to talk, because I think it's so valuable what you've done there and what you've created there. And by the way, we're going to give a couple of competition prizes out for people that want a copy of the book. We're going to do that for anyone that responds to the podcast. But just from your perspective, what's the AI is one of the biggest questions I get asked at the moment is around AI and the where the world is going when it comes to business and life. And one of those things is around prospecting as well and selling, right? And there's this common belief that they can get robots to do it and you can get people to do it. But what's your I'm going to ask you outright, I think I know the answer to this based upon our conversations in the past, but what's your view on AI and sales and how AI is going to sort of in the next few years? What do you think is going to happen with regard to that? And how do you encourage people that you work with and the companies you work with to utilize these tools to help them sort of win business?
So I think our philosophy is simple. You have to make technology your best friend in just about any business I can think of right now. I don't think AI is going to replace people. I think it's going to replace people who don't embrace AI and automation. And by the way, I think automation and AI are different, but they go hand in hand. And AI is not the panacea on its own. It's part of the solution. But again, just turn it back to sales as an example. If you can use AI, to ask better questions, to help you summarize, sales conversations and move through the sales process quicker, in a very basic form, whether it be a co-pilot use of AI or, whether you're using something like a fixer to help with some of your emails and so on and so forth, to clear the junk out so that you can respond to genuine sales inquiries quicker and more efficiently and so on. So, well, yeah, I'm a great fan of that. But interestingly, AI used badly is really bad. Okay, and we see lots of examples, I'm sure, all of us in our day-to-day lives, of where people have not really understood how to get the best out of the tool. And, you know, interesting, a few minutes ago, we both talked about the importance of great questions. Kind of the same with AI. You know, if you take a tool like ChatGPT or Perplexity, you know, the use of that tool is only as good as the user. And so in this case, it's how good are the prompts or the questions that you ask?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So great questions are important for sales and always have been. The great questions, great prompts are really important for helping AI learn and also utilizing it in an ethical way. So I definitely think it's here to stay. It's definitely going to become more and more important. I don't think we understand yet just how far it can go. But, you know, I think it's really important that business owners invest time in understanding it and working out how they're going to use it for the benefit of their business. To give you an example, I diarise 3 hours a week towards learning. Today, almost all of that 3 hours is spent learning more about different AI tools, some of them for our own businesses, the majority linked to challenges or frustrations I see clients have in their businesses, so that actually we can help them look at the right tools for them.
Mm. Yeah, it's a great point and it's a great response. And like you say, it's about utilizing it as your friend, but also understanding. For me, when I talk to people about, you know, there are lots of things that it can do more effectively than you can. For example, finding the right type, rather than, you know, if you want to find a list of 100 prospects, go and ask an AI tool. There's a great tool called LeadForge at the moment that I use that can go and interrogate, you know, millions of database of records and say, I'm looking for, you know, IT directors of such and such a firm based in this area that do this, this, and this, and we'll collect and pull that data together. And actually, when you've got that data, then tell me about their top problems, research information, and you can capture a lot of that information quite quickly. And then suddenly it's like, okay, give me an email to resonate to that audience, and that email might come back. You might think, okay, I need to make some tweaks to that, make it more human, but it goes back to those elements around questioning. But actually, then the ability to then reach out to those people and have that conversation and to act like a human being with them, to me, is the bit where we as humans come in. And I always think to people, if you act like a robot in your communications, then you're going to be seen as a robot. Whereas actually, if you act like a human being and be someone that's personable, that understands them and, you know, wants to help them, then people are going to resonate and engage with you.
Yeah, look, I think the old adage of people by people is ever present and probably ever will be. You know, but it shouldn't stop us using tools, techniques. You know, the successful businesses will be the ones that work out how to really utilize the tools in a way that really enables them to stay at the forefront of whatever it is they're trying to sell or trying to market. You know, but it's like you and I having both a version of Excel. You know, you could be a really proficient user of Excel. I could be very basic. We've got the same tool, but we'll get different levels of output from it because we've got different skill bases. So I think it's incumbent on all of us in business, whether we're a business owner or an employee, to upskill. But it's always been the case. It's just this is upskilling around new technology, and technology should be the enabler.
It's a really great point you mentioned there about using Excel. And I think that's a brilliant analogy, actually, to be able to, you know, if I think about that, the idea of, like you say, you know, my Excel skills are probably 2 out of 10 or 3 out of 10, but you can then talk to some incredible business analysts, whiz kids, you know, whiz people who, and I've got some clients I work with who literally, and I look at something, you know, when you look at a spreadsheet formula and you think, wow, that formula, you know, that's what you think, wow. But they're using the same tool, right? They're using exactly the same tool. They've just become more in tune to it, and they've become, so it's a great analogy, great way of looking at it.
But that same expert is now able to go 10 times faster because he knows what he needs the spreadsheet to do, but can now use the AI tool to help him write the formulas to crunch the data.
Mm.
And therefore, the value he brings is in the analysis and how to then apply the analysis to provide a solution rather than in the data crunch.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's where AI is really exciting.
No, I agree. So look, let's talk about the book. So obviously, let's talk about the book, which we were, yeah. And by the way, look, and I think it's really interesting actually because when I've had a good read through a couple of parts of it, and I haven't read it all yet because I went away on holiday and took it with me and I read a number of parts. But one of the things that really struck me, so this is Chris's book and called The Exit Roadmap, and Chris can talk a number about things around what the importance of it, and we'll dig into a number of areas. But the bit that for me that really stuck was the word on the cover about profitability. Because one of the things that, when we talked on the day is that a number of business owners want to sell their businesses. They have this dream of making sure that their business, has this is valued. And I know a number of people that have sold. I've sold myself. I know what it's like. But it's that word profitability that really struck out to me around that, which is to be in a position. And what I took from that is to sell your business in a way that is the right deal. And I know when we've talked about before that this is something that a lot of people unfortunately don't do well enough in or don't do in the right way. So talk to me a bit more about who nagged you to was it Rachel who nagged you to write the book? Come on and talk a bit about how long has it been going and how long was it did you start it to take to get from start to finish?
Yeah, so no one nagged me to write it. I suppose it was born out of an ongoing frustration, with the fact that, we do a lot of work with ambitious entrepreneurs who are first and foremost interested in scaling their businesses, a proportion of which will want to scale it prior to selling it for optimum value. What is common, I think, when we meet those entrepreneurs is that there's no lack of ambition, but there often is a real lack of knowledge about what it means to sell a business profitably or for optimum value.
Optimum value.
It's not about growing a business just to drive the bottom line number, because effectively that's a focus on income generation, which is fine, and a lot of us do that in the early stages of our business. But a business that is insanely profitable isn't necessarily as valuable as another that's less profitable but structured better. And indeed, we've worked or come across many business owners who've got what look on paper very profitable businesses but are completely unsaleable in their current format and the way they've been run and structured. It's almost impossible to see how a third party could acquire that business for any real value because of the way they're structured, which sounds insane given that it's a hugely profitable business. But building a saleable business is very different to building a business that is just profitable. And it's out of that learning over the last 25, 30 years that I suppose the idea for the book came, in terms of it's one of those events that most business owners will only ever do once. So the cost of getting it wrong is potentially huge. If you think about some of the stats that exist, for SME business owners in particular, I think the current estimates are that for your typical SME business owner, 80% of their wealth is tied up in their business. We've probably all met business owners who say, oh, no, I don't have a pension. My business is my pension.
Yeah.
Well, that's great, but is it? Is it really of the value that you think it's worth? I mean, it's interesting that, less than 30% of business owners have ever had their business formally valued. So if you think about that, what does that mean? Oh, that means I go around in this blissful ignorance that a business like mine generally sells for X times multiple of my bottom line profit. Does it? No. We had a lovely situation, really, as COVID hit, where we took a client's business to market. Unbeknownst to us, their major competitor was going to market at exactly the same time. Now, only afterwards did we find out some of the true numbers, but as it transpired, the two businesses had turnover in the year prior to coming to market that was within 150,000 turnover of one another. Their bottom line profit in that same year was within 50,000 of one another. Our client subsequently sold for a multiple that was nearly twice what the other one sold.
Really?
Yeah. And the only reason you can conclude it did that was because actually it was structured in a very different way to the other business. The other business was heavily reliant on not only the owner, but one or two key staff. It hadn't got some of the other structural pieces in place that our client had, and so on and so on. So they got a very different outcome, you know, of a business that on paper looked identical to the other one.
It's interesting. It's amazing when you think, because I always think about it from the, when I think about people, I obviously don't have the same experience as you have now, but I've bought and seen businesses and bought into businesses and sold my own businesses, and the thing I always think about, and it takes time sometimes to do this, is I always think about it from the buyer's perspective. The buyer's got to look at a business and go, okay, if I'm going to buy this for whatever the value is, and let's say the value is, I don't know, £1 million, okay, whatever that is. Most people aren't stupid. They're looking at it and going, okay, can I buy something and turn that £1 million that I'm giving that person or that other company for into something that's worth more than that in the future? And if you're, like you say, totally reliant on, in my experience, in my things that I see a lot of, and that's what a lot of the work that we do. We see a lot of business owners who are totally reliant on that business owner to bring the sales in. Okay, they don't have what I would call a sales engine, so they don't have a team of people. They can't win business without them being involved. And then they say, well, actually, because when you've had your paycheck and your business has been bought and you've been given your £1 million, your ability or want to go and pick up the phone and talk to talk to a prospect is like highly likely to be diminished. So therefore, your buyer is going to want to know that there is a team of people who are motivated and incentivized to do that. And if you can't teach them how to do it, if they can't do it without you, I'm going to devalue your business because I'm totally reliant on a person that's not going to be interested anymore. But that to me is an example of a structural thing that has to be put in place for a business to have maximum value.
Yeah, no, look, you clearly need a strong growth story and a history. You definitely need a business that isn't overly dependent on, a small concentration of clients, isn't overly dependent on the owner and or one or two key staff. And you clearly need, things like strong intellectual property if possible, a strong culture, team dynamic, and so on and so forth. But there's also a real parallel with, some of your core work, James, I think, in terms of how sales fits into, helping a business become exit ready. Some of the key things that we all strive for in our sales operation are really important. So for instance, predictable, repeatable sales and sales processes are generally seen as highly valuable by acquirers.
Yeah.
I talked about over-reliance on key individuals. Well, you want a sales team and a sales process that isn't reliant on one or two star performers. Really strong documented processes, decent CRM systems,
yeah.
really good visibility of the pipeline.
Yeah.
Yeah. And clarity about how you can scale that business even further once you've bought that business. So, one of the common pitfalls that business owners fall into is selling the business way too late, because, of course, when they're off, counting their money on their sun lounger with their cocktail, the new owner's there in the business and has got to see a clear path to how they're going to get a return on their investment for buying that asset, in this case, the business.
No,
you don't want to sell at the top of the curve, is what I'm saying.
It's such a good point, and it goes back to the element around, like you say, people have worked incredibly hard all their life. They've invested all their life savings and time and effort. It's their baby, and one of the other things that I've noticed, I'm interested in your view on this, is that a lot of business owners get very emotional about it, and actually, they get emotional about what they think their business is worth. And I know there's parts of, you mentioned in parts of the book around actually, the reality is you've got to take some of the emotion out of these elements. You've got to be able to you've got to be able to understand the business has got to stack up on its own without there being John or Jackie having 20 years of giving their life and soul to it.
It's a really interesting point. And the first half of the book, it's all about exit readiness. Now, many of your listeners will probably be sat here tonight thinking that that's all about what I do with the business. But actually, the first half of the book is all actually about seller readiness. So what if you are going to sell your business? Forget what you want to it's fascinating, but generally, most business owners don't know how much they actually need to be able to retire and live the lifestyle that they want. They haven't put any real thought into what sort of buyer they want to attract. Some business owners will absolutely just be happy to sell to the highest bidder. For others, it's all about the legacy and how they look after the key members of the team that got them to the point of exit and that big check. So everybody's different. And, I think getting yourself really clear about what's important to you personally and what you need personally is a key part of getting ready as a seller long before you think about what you need the business to look like in order to deliver those outcomes that you want personally for you, the family, some of the key staff you might want to reward on the way out, etc. So, there's two parts to readiness: seller readiness and business readiness. And then the second half of the book is, I think you probably see, James, it's more about the transactional processes and how you build your deal team to get the best possible outcome.
And it's really interesting because, I've done a couple of podcast interviews with a couple of people. I interviewed Dwayne Jackson, who sold Cash Flow a number of years ago. And one of the things I remember, it'd be interesting to get your view. He was, and there's a great book by Ben Horowitz, which I'm sure you've read, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. He talks around that. Actually, there was a number that he wanted, and he was going to get the number, and actually someone came in and didn't offer them a number. They were like, "You can go away. I'm not interested." And Dwayne had the same conversation. He said there was an organisation that was going to buy his company, offered him a number. Then they came into DD and started having a conversation. Then they came back with a revised number, and he was like, "Right, I told you before, because this is the number I'm looking for, and I wish you all the best, but it's not going to work for me." And it's that challenge, isn't it? Because I mean, how would you advise someone? Maybe someone's listening to this right now who's in that position that they've. We hear a lot of people as they get a bit older, they want to move away from their businesses. They've run them for a longer time. They've lost the energy or the drive, or they want to just get out and do something different. How do you advise people to cope with those moments between someone saying, "Oh, okay, well, in the due diligence process, they're going to chip away at some points, and before you know it, that valuation that they had of what they wanted is going to drop by 20% or 25%, and I guess that's the challenge that people face, isn't it? They go, "Oh, I want to get rid of it." They're torn, aren't they? But it's that difficulty being able to sort of maximize it.
No, look, I think you raised a really interesting point, and sadly, we see that happen far too often. But for me, it's all about preparation. And there are different types of buyers out there. You may sell to a trade player. You may sell to a financial buyer, possibly even a private equity-backed buyer. You might sell to a management team. You might sell to a family office. Who knows, right? There 4 or 5 key different types of buyers out there. They all will value your business differently in different ways that fit with their own individual models of valuing a business. And therefore, the part of the preparation is understanding A, the different types of buyers that are out there, B, which ones might be most interested in your business, C, which ones you're actually prepared to engage with, if indeed you can attract them, and then making sure you build the business in a way that amplifies value for that collection of 3, 4, 5 different types of buyers, so as to actually, when you get into due diligence, they can't cheat. Because you've done all the preparatory work to have the answers to all of the things that they would look to find holes with in order to do that.
And again, something I learned when I was exiting my business, a really simple tip, and I'm, you talk about being prepared, is just making sure that, I was have a folder, whether it's on your SharePoint or whatever else, of all of your documentation, of all of your simple things like this, isn't it? But a lot of business, having a folder of all your contracts in place, having a folder of all your insurances, all your contracts of people. There's all of those sort of simple things that sort of get lost a little bit, don't they? Because people think of it as a bit boring, it's not exciting, but those are the sort of elements that are the most basics that can make such a difference, can't they?
Well, they do make a big difference. Often much later in the process, once you've already sort of engaged with potential bidders for a business, and invariably when you get into the due diligence phase. But what your point point out is a really important issue for many sellers, in that when we get into the due diligence phase, there is a requirement for a huge amount of information to be put into data rooms so that potential buyers can see the data and do their due diligence. The time involved with that is significant. So if you're a business that's heavily reliant on the owner, and the owner is the one populating that data room, there's a very real chance that they get distracted from managing the day-to-day performance of the business. So the last thing you want as a seller is for your business's performance to slide over the course of the sales process.
Yeah.
That's given every potential acquirer the biggest opportunity in the world to chip you on price. So link it back to preparation. If you can build all the information, use your example of sticking things in SharePoint folders or Google Drives or wherever it is you keep this information secure, so that actually when it comes to creating the data room, you've just literally got to transfer it, then you've got a much better chance of keeping the wheels on the bus and keep the growth story going whilst you're going through the sales process.
Love it. And just, thinking of conscious of time today, but there's people obviously going to get lots of insights by reading the book. But, if someone's not reading the book, but, common 3 mistakes you see business owners make trying to sell their business.
Little or no preparation. Naive, uneducated valuations of what they think their business is worth. And little or no knowledge of what they actually need to sell the business for to live the sort of next stage of their life, whether that's retirement or investing in another entity, enterprise, but a real lack of understanding about what they need or want out of the transaction.
And interesting, I'll go back onto that final point. One of the things that so I remember interviewing Mike Clare, who sold Dreams for 200 million, and I always use the story that and people think, oh my, goodness me, he must be, how lucky was he, and 200 million. The amount of people also, and I say this to a lot of people, the amount of people that say, oh, if I sold a business for 200 million, I wouldn't do anything again. I'm like, that's why you wouldn't sell a business for 200 million, because it's not about the sale. It's for him it was something else. But I remember him interviewing him, and he said that he cried for a week after, literally cried for a week after when he sold it, because he sold it to private equity. Because for literally he'd lost his baby, he'd lost this, even though he'd had 200 million quid transferred into a bank account and it was done, he'd lost his baby and he cried for a week. This thing was there, and knowing what to do afterwards is such a key point, isn't it? And to what people want to do and how they want to live their life, and do they want to go and play golf every day or travel the world, or what do they want, and have that purpose.
And absolutely, that's what I was referring to earlier in terms of seller readiness. You've got to think about what does life look like after I've exited this business. Now, you may not exit on day one. You may have to stay and do a handover for 6, 12, 24 months, depending on what the acquirer wants. Okay, but the crying example for me brings up all of those issues about the seller's identity. For most business owners, their identity is heavily ensconced within the business. The business is a big part of them. For many business owners, as much as we would advise against it, they don't see it as an inanimate object that just generates wealth for them. They see it as almost like an extension of the family. It's almost like another child, isn't it, for some business owners? But I think you have to be absolutely clear about what is my new identity going to be, and what do I need and want for me, those nearest and dearest, and how am I going to invest my time afterwards? Hopefully you're not selling it moments before your final breath. You're going to enjoy a nice, long, happy retirement.
And it's interesting because I've known a couple of people recently that sold a business. A good friend of mine he worked for a company that they sold, and he was a shareholder that sold. And I said to him, did you go out and do something? And of course, he bought a nice flash car, a new car, and whatever else. But is that the element that people have got to? And I said to him, you've got to reward yourself. Of course you do. If that's what you want, you've got to reward yourself. You've achieved something momentous in life. But ultimately, like you say, you've also then you can drive a car 3 or 4 times and suddenly the car's a car, right? Or the watch is a watch, or the house is a house. And you got to get back to that purpose, which is why I talk about if you make a difference in the world and what you want to do, then it's going to help you, build on and use your wealth that you've gained from selling that business to make a different impact somewhere else. So, no, I think it's 100%. It's to build that, like you say, to achieve that freedom, I think is the key thing. To achieve that, the freedom that people want is so important.
I think the other point is it's never too early to start building a business that somebody will want to buy. Because actually, in a large percentage of business sales, the business owner hasn't ever taken the business formally to market. They've had an unsolicited approach that has been interesting enough to prick their curiosity. And before you know it, they're emotionally being dragged along through a process that ultimately ends up with them selling the business. Now, the downside to that is borne out by some of the stats. So if you look at business owners that have sold in the last 36 months in the UK in particular, I think the stats suggest that roughly 75% of those business owners regret selling at all. And of that 75%, nearly 60% regret selling at the price and with the structure that they sold at. So they think they got less value than they should have done. There's a simple reason for those two bits of seller's remorse. They weren't well planned. So when the unsolicited approach came, they actually weren't ready. And their business wasn't optimized to get the best value.
And look, we talked about the preparation, and to send, before we finish off, because I'm conscious of time today, and it's been great to share. Like, we can talk for ages about this sort of stuff. One of the other things that I've noticed, and I know you talk about it in the book around that planning process, is the time frames that people expect things to happen in, and there is this misconception, isn't there, that things can be done quite quickly and easily, and before you know it, it's I'll set it in X months, whereas the process is a lot longer than that. Is there any other advice you would, obviously apart linked to the planning stuff that you talked about, but just that expectation level there is?
Yeah, look, I think it's how you sell the business, right? So in the case of some of those unsolicited approaches, you might sell the business relatively quickly. We see deals done in 3 or 4 months, in some cases. But, a reasonably sized business running a proper process where they perhaps build a deal team that ultimately enlists the support of a corporate finance team or a business broker, etc. The time they've done all the planning and preparation, taken the business to market through teasers, NDAs being signed, marketing it properly to those that have signed the NDAs with proper information memorandum type documents, solicited first offers, negotiated a bit around those, gone best and final offers, through due diligence, having given one party perhaps exclusivity, you're generally talking a minimum of 9 months, and in many cases 12 to 18 months. But go back to what I said, if you're going to do this exercise only once, you want to do it properly. And why rush unless you've got some personal need to rush? Do it properly and optimize the value by doing it properly. But part of it is understanding what you know and what you also need around you in terms of deal teams. So controversial, particularly for a man that owns majority stake in an accounting business. But most accountants aren't equipped and qualified to help with the sale of a business. Most accountants are simply compliance-led. Okay, so find yourself a decent accountant, a decent tax consultant to support you on the journey. Find yourself a decent business broker or corporate finance partner. You may have to accept that your normal solicitors are not competent in dealing with commercial transactions like this one. And equally, make sure you've looped in with a decent IFA who's really helped you understand, both in preparation phases and then throughout the sale process, about how you're going to manage that newfound wealth.
No, it's a great advice.
That's about the deal team. And of course, you can also find yourself a great business coach to help you through that process as well.
And if you happen to know anyone, let me know, right?
If you find one, let me know.
look, brilliant. Look, Chris, it's been great to chat to you. I'm conscious that we could go on all night about this. What we're going to do is, as I say, Chris's book um, is, and what I loved about the fact of the book is that you've got those simple action points as well at the end of every chapter, some practical stuff that people can use and implement, and the stuff that I've read, say I think it's a great framework, and it's a tool that you can use to go and make this happen. Of course, if you want the expertise of the man himself and the team himself, go and talk to Chris at Chalk Hill Blue, and we'll put some communication details out as well. But it's a really great book that to put people on the right path, because so many business owners do have that dream. I think we all know that they've got this thing that they've built, and they want to know that it's got some value somewhere, or that it can enable them to do something else in the world, or to have that dream, as I know a number of people that I know have sold, of having that choice and that freedom, the ability to make choices that what they want to do in their life. But it is, as you say, it's fraught with challenges, it's fraught with difficulties, and it's also fraught, as you say, with the element of actually selling it and making it happen. And so many business owners don't make it happen because something happens in the journey along the way, which is why they need people like you.
The facts again are clear. Less than 20% of businesses that are brought to sale every year actually sell.
Yeah.
Sad reality is most of them just close the doors.
Yeah, which is ridiculous.
20, 30 years, blood, sweat and toil building that business, to then not sell it because you simply didn't understand how to structure it to be a saleable business.
Yeah.
Kind of criminal, really. So hopefully the book will give people a few insights into how to do it. There's hopefully enough practical hints and tips in there that they can put a lot of the steps in place themselves. But as you say, if people would like some extra help, check out the stuff on the Chalk Hill Blue website. There's a great survey tool on there called our Exit Readiness Survey. If you take that as a business owner, you'll get a personalised report on where you need to improve, the business to make it really saleable. And if you take one of those surveys and you want to then book a call to have the results explained in a bit more detail, we'd love to help.
Look, great feedback, and we'll put links to the Exit Readiness tool and also to your LinkedIn profile, Chris, and Chalk Hill Blue's website. And one of the things I'd encourage people to also to do is you do some number of workshops every quarter, which people can come along to as well, and to build their plans to help them get on. Like you say, because a lot of the things around selling, there's an element around there's the infrastructure and the support and the operational things they've got to do day to day and week to week and month to month to get them in that place. And that's where you guys are also experts at helping people bring that together so that they've got a business engine that runs effectively, and that then can enable them to then be in the best position to sell.
Absolutely. And I think one thing we try and do is help business owners build value, not just income. So, it's a different sort of methodology to just building a bottom line number, but of course they go hand in glove.
No, great, love it. Look, Chris, amazing. We've chatted for a lot. What was to say we're going to do? We're going to give 2 copies of the books. We're going to myself and Chris will share the podcast when it comes out. We'll put this out for 2 people who want a copy of the book. I'll pay for this, so it just increases Chris's royalties even more because he's a great guy, and what Chalk Hill Blue do is great. And I'd love if you're a business owner, you want a copy of the Exit Roadmap, put a comment in. We're going to put in the social media links just to put a comment in there, and the first 2 people that do that will get a copy of the book sent through to them so that they've got a chance to go and build what they want and put all the steps in place. And as I say, if you then do go and work with Chris, let me know because I'll get a kickback. I'll get he can then. I'm joking. That's not how it works. But look, it's been really fantastic for you to share, and thank you for creating the book, Chris, because I think there's lots of books around lots of subjects, and certainly in the area around sales or marketing, whatever. But I think what you touched upon and that I took from it is something that is this whole thing that is part of people's lives. It's their whole. I know when the first 15 years of running my business, it was everything for me. It was my life, and it was. I made some mistakes. I'm not going to go into them now. I made some definitely mistakes in terms of how I got to where I finished up. But I think having that pathway, if I'd had this to be able to help me on that journey, I think it would have been a different path to where I got to. So I wish you'd written it 15 years, well, 7 or 8 years ago, I should say. But yeah, you didn't. But look, the fact you've written it now and it's there for people to use is much appreciated. So thank you for doing that.
Brilliant. Look, James, thanks again for having me on, and as I say, hope people enjoy the book.
I'm sure they will. So look, as I say, it's and by the way, people can connect you on LinkedIn. We'll put some links to LinkedIn, and obviously some links to Chalk Hill Blue. And if people want to connect, you're happy for people to connect you up on LinkedIn.
Of course, no, more the merrier. Love to help people. But we can only work with so many people at any one time. But again, there's loads of free resources that we love just sharing out. And so just reach out. Whatever the problem, we'll have something to help, I'm sure.
Great stuff. Look, well, good. Well, that was great to have you on board. Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate your time, and as I say, really appreciate what you've done with the book, and look forward to seeing lots of people read it and making it an even more of an Amazon bestseller. I still think you want to go up to the top of the Amazon list even more. There's more work to do there. You haven't quite got to the stage where you've sold hundreds of thousands of copies worldwide yet. So we want to get to that point, right? So
exactly. I mean, we did beat Stephen Covey in 7 Habits, in the first week, so that was all right.
On that note, that's a pretty good way to finish. But look, well, Chris, thanks for being here tonight. Really appreciate it. Great to have your insights and wisdom as ever, and to talk things through. So really appreciate it. And yeah, as I say, we'll look forward to seeing the next edition of the next book come out. When's the next book coming out? We'll have
I'm taking a rest for a while.
All good. All right, great stuff. Thanks, Chris.
All right. Take care, guys. Thank you, James.
Cheers now. Bye-bye. Right, so that was it. That was Chris Spratling and the Exit Roadmap, talking about all the things you need to do to put a business in place that has the maximum value that you need and you want. And I really encourage you to read it. I really encourage you to follow Chris on social media. So many wisdom tips and ideas that he's got that can help you make what your core thing of a business come to life in the right way that you want, and doing that planning and preparation as he talked about. So that's it for this week's episode on Diary of a Sales Expert. Hope you enjoyed. If you have, let me